We will, in Mirz Hashem, study Memches, but first, on the bottom of Mem Zayin and Beis, Omer of Papa, which is 4 lines up before the end, Shitoli, I have no doubt, he says, that Malo Chafnov, in the case of the Pilas Ktoris of Kohen Gadol, on Yom Kippurim, the Chafina is Kireh Chafni Inshi. That's portion. No, it's the normal way that people do a chafina with their hands, and they are tochev shtei yadam b'tzidei akli. They put their 2 hands into the sides of the kli, or over the sides of the kli, where the ktoris is. Yishachude yadav, where the ends of his fingers from the zeres are towards the bottom. And they grab together the Ktoris. Boy, Rapapa, but Rapapa has a suffix about Chafan Baroshe, means that Hamid Kapos Shteyod of Chain Smudos, he puts the 2 palms of his hand together, one next to the other, and Gav Kapos Hayadayim Klapi Gufo, and he digs the chafina, the ktoris, in towards his body, klapimata. B'tocha v'zroshet v'osa v'sivei v'eskaf yodo b'tocha ktoris. And then he joins them together until he fills it up. Now, is this a valid chafina or not? Furthermore, milamata lemalo mal. Let's say, for example, he digs in his hands, not so that they fall between his hands and the two palms come together, but rather he digs it in milamato lamala, that he puts his hands together, digging in on the bottom and pushing them together until his hands are filled. I have diagrams here if you want to see them. Mao, what's the din? And furthermore, a third suffix of Rapapa is minatzad. He pushes his hands on the side. In other words, hifnis as Torah chafan of derech harevach shebein hagudal li etzba b'tzvidi yodov. And in a sense, he's like pushing the chafina of the Torah into his 2 hands. And chafin biadzu v'kirvan zo eitzel zu mahu. And let's say he digs in one hand with the other hand, each hand onto itself until he brings them together. Lo kirvan, if he doesn't bring them together, ain't suffix shapes on a cloud. Certainly not a chafin. And in all these questions, a boy, and here on the top of Memches and Amral, boy Rav Papa has the following suffix in the case of comments. So now we're moving into Kmitza of Menachos. Memches Amid Aleph.
Okay.
So now he's talking about comments, right? Kmitza in Menachos. And you have to do the kmitza in a kli sharetz. And what happens is that after he does the kmitza, the komets, whatever comes between his fingers, goes down into this kli and it becomes sanctified. And Rav Papa vacillates about the following. Davke lekomet b'dofneha dimon. What he does is he takes the komets and he apparently adheres it, he attaches it to the side of the kli, on the inside of the kli, but against the side of the kli. And it doesn't go down to the bottom. Is that a valid kmitza? And here the two tzaddim. One side is betoch kli be'inan. All he needs is that the komets be submerged above the top of the kli, inside the receptacle, va'ika, that he achieved. Oh, Dilma, no. He needs hanacha b'tocho. he needs to place the komets inside the kli. Hitikno be'ina. Hitikno means we need it to be on the bottom of the kli. V'alekon, it's not on the bottom of the kli. Teku. The Gemara comes to no definite decision, no conclusion. Boymar Baravashi, another suffix. Afche lemana. He turns the kli upside down. And instead of putting the komets inside the kli, it's now outside the kli on top. The dabke lekomets be arase demana. The komets is virtually attached to the floor of the kli, again upside down. And mau anocha b'tocho binon va'ika. What happens is that on the other side of the kli, there's an indent, such that now, in a sense, you could say that the komets is inside the air of the airspace of the receptacle, because since there's a curvature on the underside of the kli, which is now on the top, therefore it's inside the kli. O dilma, shall we say hanocha kitikna be'ina? We need a hanocha inside the kli, literally inside the kli, v'leka, and he turned the kli upside down, and he placed the komets on the outer side of the kli. Once again, the Gemara comes to no conclusion. Another subject. Now we're going back to the sugya on Daf Mem Zayin, the previous Daf, which addresses the mitzvah of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim called Chafina, where he puts his hands into the kli in order to scoop up the Ketores. And Rav Papa vacillates, Malo chafnav sha'amru mechukos o gedushos. When the Torah says that the Kohen has to take mole chafnav, he has to fill up his hands, does it mean mechukos, which means that the top of the Torah is parallel, exactly aligned with the top of his fingers? O gedushos, no. He needs that the top part of the Torah should go above the top part of his hands. In other words, it overflows. And in this case, the Gemara says we have a final answer. There's a resolution. Amale Rabbi Abba Rav Ashi Toshma. Listen to the language of the Brisa. Malo chafnav she'amru lo mechukos v'lo gedushos. It's neither flat against the top of his fingers, nor does it rise above the top of his fingers, but rather elat fufos. Fufos means, in modern Hebrew, it's safos. Safos means like you're floating. In other words, the top part of the Ketores goes a little bit above the top of his hands, like something that floats on top. So it's a little bit more than mechukos, because with mechukos we said it's exactly, flat against the top of his hands, and it's a little bit less than gedushos. It's not really overflowing, but yet it's above the level of mechukos. We learned in the Mishnah in Masechet Zvachim with regard to a carbon that was shechted, b'nishpach adam al haritzpah. So this Gemara, I actually remember. It's amazing. I remember anything from Zvachim, but I remember this a little bit. There are two dinim with regard to Kabbalah Tzadam. The first din is, let's say, after he does the shechita, the dam falls on the ground, the ritzvah of the azar, and then he collects it into a kli. And the second scenario is where he collects it in a receptacle, which is also called a mizrach, directly as the blood flows from the neck of the animal, and then he dropped it, he poured it onto the ritzvah, and then he collects it from the ritzvah. So the difference is, in the first case, the dam went directly from the tzara behema down to the ritzvah. Now he's collecting it. In the second case, it went from the dam hatzavar into the kli, from the kli to the ritzvah, and then he collects it. And the Mishnah establishes in Zvachim that nishbach adam ala ritzvah, if the dam goes straight from the neck of the animal, and before he's able to receive it in a kli, it falls onto the ritzvah, and then he collects it from the ritzvah, possible. But if, on the other hand, and now the Gemara is quoting the next Mishnah in Zvachim, after the shchita, the carbon, he received the dam straight from the tzavar into a kli, and then nishpach hadam min hakli ala ritzva vasofo kosher. Why? Because in this particular scenario, there was a Kabbalah in the Kli. Once there was a Kabbalah in the Kli, then the dam becomes suitable, ra'ui, fit for Zrika. And the fact that it fell on the Ritzvah is not going to possible. But there must be a Kabbalah of dam into the Mizrach directly from the Tzara Behem. Minani Mili. What's the source for this? The Tanur Rabbanan we learned in the Brisa. And now we're going to the Parsha in the 4th chapter of Vayikra. This is called the Par Chata Shel Koi Mashiach. There are a number of different violations which incur, if they were done b'shogeg, a chatas of the Kohen Gadol. What kinds of violations was he guilty of? For example, there was a hora, a psak, on something that would generate kares. And the Kohen Gadol, thinking that this is a valid hora, that this decision that was made and a ruling that was handed down was viable and reliable, he went ahead and he violated a chiyuv kares as a result of this hora b'tos. He's chayav to bring a par chatos. He has to bring a separate par, which is called the par chata shel kohen Mashiach. And the Torah says, "V'lokach hakohen Mashiach midam hapar." And we derive from this that the Kohen has to receive the dam of the par. Now, it's very interesting. There's a mem before the word dam, and then it says hapar. It doesn't read smoothly. What it should say is dam mehapar, meaning if the Torah was trying to convey and teach that the dam has to come from the par, meaning from the tzavar abehema, then it should have said dam mehapar. Instead, it says mi dam hapar. So the Gemara says that we're going to learn two different halachos from this mi dam hapar. On the one hand, the Torah seems to be honing in, or shall we say, specifying a particular dam. And that's why the mem comes before the dam. The mem is a limiting, restricting adjective that says from the dam, but not all the dam. And when the Kohen has to be makabel the dam, what part of the dam is the Torah referring to? It's clearly indicating mi dam, certain dam, but not all dam. So the Brisa says that we're going to differentiate between something called dam hanefesh and other types of dam. Now, in the footnote that I have here in the Masifta, he has a whole list of different types of damim, only one of which is dam hanefesh. For example, the first dam to come out of the animal after the shchita is called dam shachar. It's very dark in color. Afterwards comes dam edom. Adom means red blood. Now, both of them can be grouped under one category, which is called shosasin. Shosasin means that they sort of drip down. Again, I never saw shchita, so I can't tell you. I once saw a video of shchita, but this I don't remember. Anyway, I guess when the incision begins, the dam begins to flow out. Then, after you have that first flow of black or dark blood and then red blood, then you have what's called kiluach. The third dam to come out is dam bikiluach. It spurts. Behu dam shaneshama yotzespo. This is the dam where the nefesh is, so that the animal dies as a result of that third dam, the dam that spurts. And afterwards, we get to dam number 4, which is mismayit hadam. Now the dam slows down. And again, it's shoses v'yored, it just drips down. And the final dam, which is dam number 5, is called tamtzis hadam, otherwise known as dam tamtzis. Now, this is an entire sugya. He quotes it here in the footnote from Krisus. I know it from Chulin. And there's machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about the status of the dam ha'adom. That's only shoses. That was the second dam after the initial dark dam. And it's not makaleach. Reish Lakish classifies that dam as dam hanefesh. It's already dam hanefesh. Once the initial dripping of the dark blood, and we're up to stage number 2 of the red blood, Reish Lakish already identifies that red blood as dam hanefesh. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, no. You have to wait a while till you get to dam hanefesh. That's the dam that's not shoses, but rather kolech. Now, what other damim are enumerated here in this brisa that are excluded from the mitzvah of dam? Number 1, the lomi dam ha'or. In other words, initially, when he immediately slices the neck of the animal, there's dam that comes out of the neck of the skin, and he hasn't even gotten yet to the shchita, meaning to the shnei simonim. He's just cut the skin on the outside. That's not dam as far as the mitzvah of karban is concerned. The lomi dam atamtzis, which we said is the last dam at the end of the shchita. As far as the 3 other damim in between, so we have the black dam that comes out initially after he shechts the animal, that's not dam. Then he has the red dam, that's a machlok between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. And finally, after the red dam, he has dam hakolech, which according to everyone is classified as dam hanefesh. Okay, fine. Now, as I said before, there are 2 things that we're deriving from this phrase of midam hapar. Now we're up to the second derivation. It says midam hapar. In other words, there's an additional mem, and the Gemara is now going to flip around this mem, the Bryce, I should say. Dam me'apar yikablenu. He has to receive the dam from the par, meaning directly from the par without it falling onto the ritzvah. And what this means is that we're allowed to take a letter from one word and pull it out and attach it to another word. And that's an amazing kind of drushos. Later on the Gemara is going to classify this methodology. But the bottom line is that what we're deriving from dam me'apar, if you switch over the mem to the word me'apar, is that he has to be makabel the dam directly from the tzavra behema into his klishares. He's not allowed to let it fall on the floor, on the ritzvah hazor, and then do an asifa and collect it together. The isal kedaita. The Gemara says the following. If you're going to read the words midam hapar as they are written, without switching the mem over to the second word hapar, then you would have to be makabel in a kli. It's got to be midam hapar, which would mean part of the dam. Mi, meaning, let's say you have a volume of dam. Some part, some segment of the volume of that dam, he should receive. Afilu mixas dam. All we need is a minimum amount of dam because it says midam. That can't be. Why? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Makabel Tzoshi Kabel's Kol Dam Mishal Parsha, Never Best Kol Dam Apar Yishbok Al Yisod Mizvach HaOlam. So that Rabbi Yehuda invokes and derives from a pasuk that you have to be makabel all the dam. Now, when Rabbi Yehuda says you have to be makabel all the dam, it doesn't mean that that's absolutely critical. We'll see how much dam he has to take, but if it was an ideal lechatchila situation, he would be makabel all the dam. So you can't say that on the one hand, Rabbi Yehuda is correct, and he has to be makabel eskol dam shel and on the other hand, mi dam apar means mitzas dam. That's an open contradiction, and therefore, instead of learning mi dam, meaning some dam, we're going to learn a dam me'apar, that you have to be makabel the dam directly from the tzavar of the animal. Elishmamina. Therefore, the Gemara concludes, after having quoted Rabbi Yehuda, they have to makabel all the dam, that mi dam apar means dam me'apar. Take the mem from mi dam and steal it, attach it to me'apar, to the hapar. Yikablen. Kasavar. Oh, now what's this methodology that we can take a letter from one word and attach it to the next word? That's called gorin umosifim vidarshan. We can subtract and then add and then darshan. So we're going to take away and subtract the mem from midam, and we're going to be mosif that mem to the word apar. And that's going to give us a drush of a lokach dam me'apar, meaning directly from the par, not from the floor. He tells me here in a footnote, which I'm not so clear about this, and you have to know a lot more about this than I know. There is what's called a Medrash Agada of Rabbi Eliezer Beno Shel Rabbi Yosef Glili, who lists no less than 32 midos shator nidreshes. You know, we're usually familiar with 13 midos shator nidreshes. Rabbi Eliezer has an expanded list in which he has 32 midos, and amongst those midos, he has a midah called notrikon. Now, I always understood notrikon means that we view a letter as if it was a full word. Here, we're going a step further. We're taking a letter away from one word and attaching it to another word. He says, that the Torah gave us a certain amount of leeway with the sequence of letters and the way it's organized and attached into words. He gives a beautiful example here from a pasuk in Tehillim. The pasuk says, "Shilchu b'eish mikdashecha." What does that mean? Shalchu ba'eish mikdashecha. It really means Shalchu eish b'mikdashecha. So we take the base from the word ba'esh and we attach it to mikdashecha. The Od Rabos Kahena says there are many, many examples of that sort. Now you might ask, why did the Torah deliberately, try to, in a sense, confuse us by putting the mem and attaching it to the word dam instead of attaching it to para? So he writes that Nikomakov lo nichtav dam me'apar k'dei lismoch es tevas dam hapar lidrosh shakavana l'dam hanefesh. So by saying mi dam hapar and attaching the mem to the word dam, it indicates that not all damim are included in or qualify as the dam for the mitzvah of the carbon, of Zrika Saddam, etc. Abol Saddam. Okay, now dam that falls directly from the tzavar habehema to the ground is possible. However, if it was accepted, received first in a kli sharis and then it fell on the ground, it's kosher. And the Gemara now wants to know what happens in an exact parallel case in chafina of ketores of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur. Boira Rav Papa. Nispazer aktores bimalo chafna. Now watch this. After malo chafna, the Kohen Gadol is meant to place the ketores in his hands into a kli sharis. Once it goes into a kli sharis, it's kadosh, and then if it falls on the ground, you can collect it. What happens if after he does the chafina, it falls to the ground before he gets to put it into a kli sharis? And he says the following: the first side is to say yodo kitsavar behemadon, that we should create a parallel, or if you want to call it a mirror image, where his yad is like the tzavar abehema, and therefore it has to go from his hands into the kli directly, just like the blood has to go from the tzavar abehema directly into the kli sharis. And therefore, in this case, where nispazra aktores, before it got into the kli, psula. Oh, Dilma, no. An amazing chiddush. Yado kikli sharis no. His hands have the status of a kli sharis. Not like the tzara behem, but like the mizrak in which he received the dam from the tzara behem. So the ketores mikra din does not really require a kli. The yadayim of the Kohen Gadol are considered a kli, and when he puts it into a kli afterwards, that's the only way that he can get it into the Kodesh Kodashim. He's got to carry it in a kaf with the machta in his other hand, so that in the Kodesh Kodashim he could burn the ketores. But technically, if he didn't have a problem burning his hands, he could burn it directly from his hands. And therefore, if it fell onto the ground after it was in his hands, lo psula teku. Once again, the Gemara leaves it as an open-ended question. Boira papa, ishev bechafinas ketores mahu. How do we define chafina? Shall we classify it as we would any of the four avodos of a zevach, like shchita, kabbalah, halacha, zrika? And if the Kohen, while he's doing any of the avodas, has a machshav of chutzlus mano, that passes the karban. What about the Kohen if he does the chafina and he has in mind that he's going to burn this ketores not today on Yom Kippur, but tomorrow on the 11th day of the month of Tishrei? Mi'am Rinon, should we say there's a gzeira shava of milo mi mincha? In the parsha of mincha, it says below kumtza. In chafina, it says below chafna. Mahasam, this gzeira shava is going to equate the two. Mahanya ba machshava. Mahanya is a very strange language. Mahanya usually is a positive. It works. Great. It's valid. But here Mahanya means in the negative. Mahanya be machshava means that there's a machshavas psul in kmitza. Because the Gemara in Menachos derives a hekesh that mincha is equated to shlomim with regard to all machshavas apostles. So just like in shlomim, let's say you had a machshavas pigul of chutzes mano, chutzes komo, so too in a mincha, like shlomim, the same psul applies. Now, if we can equate mincha with chafina, if at the time of the Maisa Chafina he has a thought that he's going to be makted this ketores tomorrow, that is going to be a psul of machshavas pigul. Oh, or should we say no? Maybe we're not going to derive this gzeira shava from kmitza, and therefore there's no psul of machshavas pigul with regard to the chafina. I'll tell you the truth, Ira, I don't understand this Gemara, because Kabbalah, I know, ever since I'm a child, I was always taught that Gzeira Shava comes as a matter of tradition.
Right.
I'm not familiar
But
with this kind of thing where the Gemara is back and forth on whether we accept this Gzeira Shava. I don't know. It's very strange to me. Let me just
but
see if I.
doesn't that happen sometimes? Like I've seen that before, where they do have a bit of a machloket on a Xera
Oh,
Shava.
machloket, yes. A machloket means that, let's say, one opinion says, I got this Kabbalah, the tradition of this Gzeira
Right.
Shava was part of my,
Right.
and the other one says, no, I have a different Gzeira Shava to replace
Oh,
this
I
one.
see. I
And we
see.
juggle
Okay.
it around. But the Gemara itself should come up with a suffix, looking at two
Right.
words that are
Whether it's a
identical.
Xera Shava.
Right? It
Yeah.
says Milo,
Yeah.
Milo. You want to know, should we darshan Xer Shabbat? That's not your business.
Right.
Who me samcha? Who authorized
Right.
you to? Like today we have computers. We can do
Okay.
word search. I can come up with
Right.
1,001 Xer Shabbats.
Right.
It sounds like the Gemara is like just well, I found the same word twice.
Right.
Let me just see if he points anything out. I doubt it, but no, I don't see anything offhand. I would be chutzpahdik to say that this is not really a Gzeir Shav at all. The Gemara just means that
Right.
there's a logical connection between the two. We're not hanging it on Gzeir Shav. That's what I would have said, but that's
Right.
that's a chutzpah on my part. In any event, Amalei Rav Shimi Bar Ashi Lirav Papa Toshma. I want to be posted this suffix from a Mishnah in Masechet Edios. The Mishnah records the testimony, so to speak, of Rabbi Shimon ben Beseira with regard to Paraduma. And he's talking about what's called the Efer Paras Chatos Shenoga Tame b'miktsaso. And he has a principle that Tuma b'miktsaso is Keilu Nitma b'kulo. And if I'm not mistaken, that applies if it's all in one kli. Let me just see if anybody points that out. Oh, he says the following. Nemar Batorah, this is in Parshas Kukas, we're going to get to it soon, in 2 weeks' time. Sa'al Yidei Efer Paras Achatos, the Paraduma, Nitharim Mitumas Mes, V'yosel Chachamim Maila B'taraso, Kemuvur B'Mishnah Zu, She'ima Efer Nimtza B'Kli Echad. Excellent. Kli Echad. So this is what you call Tziruf Kli. Afshe Efer Asui Migufim Chalukim. Let's say there are different clumps of Efer, but it's all in one Kli. Is HaKli Mitzaref es Kol Mashe B'Socho Leichashev Kiguf Echad V'im Noga Tomi B'Mitzas HaEfer Timei Es Kula. That is the statement of Rav Shimon ben Beseira. V'hosef Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is going to now take that din and apply it in 3 other, or maybe even 4 other cases. This din of Tziruf Kli. Number 1, soles, meaning the refined flour pinachos, that if you have soles in a Kli, even though let's say the Tameh only touched part of the solas, he had no contact with the other part of the solas, but it's all in one Kli, then the Tumah, so to speak, transfers throughout the Kli, all the contents of the Ketores. Now, Ketores, by the way, could mean one of 2 things, or maybe both. It can either refer to the Ketores of the whole year round or the Ketores of Yom Kippurim. In this case, I think it would be both. Probably be both. And then we get to Levona. Now, when you bring a Korban Mincha, not all Minachos, but some Minachos, they are accompanied by Levona. And if you want to see what Levona looks like, I could actually show that to you.
Okay.
Believe it or not, I didn't plan this, Ira.
Okay.
This is Levona. It's a very teeny bottle. It's about the size of a thumb, less than a thumb.
Right.
And I'm using this as an experiment. They told me that this would help get my sense of smell back to 100%. Right now, I think it's about 50%.
This is still from COVID?
I mean, I don't know, but I definitely don't smell 100%. That's for sure. Now, will I be able to smell after this Lavona stuff? I don't know. I had a whole shaila. I wanted to discuss it with one of the members of the kollel, whether I could use it on Shabbos, whether I did it for fool. In any event, so when we bring a carbon mincha, we accompany the mincha with Lavona, and this applies to all minachos that are burnt on the Mizbeach. And we have to put a kometz of Lavona. Lavona, of course, is one of the various samamonim of the Ketores. And the only exception to this rule where Lavona is excluded is what's called a minchas chote. There's certain sins that generate a chiyuv mincha. And I have somewhere a list, I put it in my car already, a list of those chatoim that generate a minchas chote. And then, of course, in this last week's parasha, we had minchas sota. There's no Lavona in a minchas sota. And the Lavona, as a general rule, is placed on top of the mincha. Li'achar sheyotzkim oleha es hashemen. So first we have the mincha, the soles, then we pour in the shemen, and on top of that mixture, we pour the Lavona. The Kohen then does a kmitza from this mincha, and that kmitza generates kedusha of kometz, what's called the kedushas klishares. That's makadosh the kometz. Then he takes the Lavona, which is on top of the mincha, and he puts it on the kometz. He's maktir both the Lavona and the kometz on the mizbeach, and this is all at the beginning of Sefer Vayikra. So once again, if the Lavona is in a kli and there was contact between a tameh and part of the Lavona, the entire Lavona in the kli is all tameh. And number 4 on the list is Gechalim. Now here I'm not sure what the Gemara means. Gechalim are the coals that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim use when he digs them up in the pan in the machta, and then he goes into the Kodesh Kodashim and he puts the Ketores, which is in the kaf, pouring it into the machta, onto the Gechalim. Now it says in Nogat Ful Yom, the Miktasa Pasal is Kula. Now, how does that figure out in the case of Gechalim? I think what he's saying is that he has to replace the Gechalim. Just see in the footnote here. HaGechalim shechote min ha-mizbech b'chol yom ein b'hem kedusha. Oh, I see. He has a machlokes here between the Rambam and the Ravid about which Gechalim is this brisa. Actually, it's a Mishnah I was talking about. Is it the Gechalim of Yom Kippurim or the Gechalim that is Chote min ha-mizbech b'chol yom? But again, I think what he's saying is that the Gechalim now on the Kabul Tumah. My only question is, what happens if he went ahead and the Kohen Gadol was mocked to the Ketores on these Gechalim? Does that invalidate the Ketores? I don't know. Fine. So now again, it's Tful Yom. Let's just go over the basics. Tful Yom means that he was mitayr himself on that day. He went into the mikvah, and he has to wait until Harev Shemesh. And with Harev Shemesh, his tumah passes. Okay. Now at this point, the Gemara thinks that we should be medayek from this Mishnah the following way. Either pasal Tful Yom, if you're saying that the Ketores is vulnerable to the psul of Tumah, in the case of Tful Yom, then it must be that the Ketores has the status of Kedushas Haguf, meaning if the Ketores doesn't have the status of Kedushas Haguf, then it would not be disqualified by a Tful Yom. by a Tful Yom is not Mitami Chulin, he's only Mitami Kodshim, because he already went to Mikvah. So now the Gemara is going to make the following jump, or shall we call it an analogy here. If there's Kedushas HaGuf, the very moment that the Ketores was placed into a Kli, such that now it's susceptible to Tumas Tful Yom, so then Paslanami Lina, we should apply the same logic to Lina. And if the Ketores was left overnight in this Kli Shares, it now should become possible, like any Dover Kodesh with Kedushas HaGuf, with Lina.
Right.
Now another equation. It's like a whole domino theory. Umida Lina Paslava, since there's a psul of Lina Paslanami Machshava. If the Torah is sanctified with Kedushas HaGuf, then it's subject A to Tuma as a psul Tuma, and B to a psul of Lina, and now 3 to the psul of Machshava, if he thinks that he's going to leave over the Torah until tomorrow. And that's the final conclusion of this sugya. Boy Rav Papa. So what I'd like to do now is turn to